Hello, I'm Thomas Ayer, Chief Content Officer of the Performance-Driven Marketing Institute, a not-for-profit trade association that serves companies in the performance and direct-to-consumer marketing world. Welcome to the latest episode of Take 20, created by the PDMI's Brand Response Council. These 20-minute live conversations featuring leaders in the performance marketing world, speaking about the hottest topics in the industry, are scheduled twice monthly. Check out the pdmi.com/take-20 for the upcoming schedule. Before we get to the conversation, a quick housekeeping note. The group will be addressing any questions from the audience at the end of today's session, but you don't have to wait to ask them. Utilize the questions tab on your control panel to type in and send your question. We'll be collecting them and try to get as many as possible in the final moments of the episode. Let's get to it. Today, we're talking about e-commerce case studies that you can steal from right now. I'd like to welcome our host, Christopher Foster, Vice President of New Business at Modern Postcard, a national direct marketing company that serves businesses of all sizes and in all markets. Chris is the chair of our Brand Response Council. His guest today is Paul Savage, the Vice President of Partnerships at CoreDNA, a digital tech leader who wrote a blog post for CoreDNA's site a few weeks back on this same topic. So thanks all for joining us. Chris, take it away.
Greetings, thanks Thomas, and welcome. Guys, I'm here with Paul Savage, the VP of Partnerships at CoreDNA. Like Thomas said, CoreDNA is dedicated to providing a family of digital solutions for content, commerce, marketing, and everything in between in one digital platform. That gives Paul some unique experience that we're happy to take advantage of, and we thank him for his participation. Over the many clients, years, and investigative learning to support his business, Paul Savage has researched 19 e-commerce case studies for 2020, really relevant, and he's packaged them up into a fantastic ebook and a blog post. We'll be sharing that blog post link later on in the show, and he's going to share some key insights with us today. Thanks, Paul.
Thank you very much, Chris. Great to meet everybody. Thanks for that great introduction as well. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of the things that we've learned just from looking at those sites.
Great. So here's the thing. There are 19 e-commerce case studies. Guys, we don't have time for all of them. So when you check the post out, you can do more of the learning yourself. But we do have time for Paul to share some key examples. And we picked these examples because in the world of e-commerce options, brands have unlimited choice for tools and technology and platforms, but not necessarily the budget for everything they want. That's normal. That's part of business life. But what every team does have, though, is time and talent with their own team. So these examples were ones that we asked Paul to take a look at, and he chose these because these examples cost nothing except the time. These are improvements made by thinking differently and thinking cleverly, not necessarily by just technology or tools. So Paul, I'm going to ask you, you had one about edible arrangements, and I just want to talk about that and go through some of the other examples that you've highlighted. So I'll have you take it away.
Sure. So edible arrangements, I'm sure a lot of people are familiar with what they do. But what we saw was that they were just adding in just a little bit of urgency into the shopper's experience. And you could add urgency in a lot of different ways by showing the amount of stock you have, or showing a special offer that's going to be limited. What these guys did was they took it a little bit further, and they talked about same-day delivery. So taking that urgency part, looking at how long can they still deliver that, and just dynamically saying, if your orders tend to go out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, what time in the day can you guarantee that you're going to get that same day delivery out the door? If that's 2 o'clock and you can have your programmer set up something that'll say just a little countdown clock, that's very, very easy, shouldn't break the bank, but hopefully for those customers will encourage them to pull out that credit card a lot quicker.
Sure, and it is a funny thing because the urgency factor has been a long-standing tactic used from infomercials way back in the day, right? Even the Sham Wow infomercial, where Vince says, look, I've got the special offer, but I can't do it all day. You got 20 minutes to call, right? So those are all things that actually, the reason they use them is that they work. But what's interesting is how to translate that into an e-commerce environment.
Right, like say your store is open 24/7. Do you operate at the weekend, right? Do you do shipping at the weekend? These are things that if you do it, make sure that that's a point that you get across to your customer, that they're not going to wait until Monday. You might ship it on Saturdays or Sundays, and that could be an advantage for you. So, sharing that information about how you're different or how you're better is definitely something that I would encourage you to do and think about.
Wonderful example, great example, creating that sense of urgency. Now, on an analogous note, it comes to kind of urgency of messaging and tactics, there's also urgency, I think, of website copy. And the reason that I think that, this is such a good example is, again, it doesn't cost money to write really compelling website copy. It costs, there's time and there's effort and there's energy and there's the salary of the good and the talented hire, but it's not like it's a hard cost that you have to pay something monthly, right? It's just thought. So you had a really good example from AmeriSleep in terms of improvement of website copy, and they lifted conversion.
So the hard part with copy is it can be, it's definitely subjective. You want to make sure that you're getting the message across, but you also want to be concise. So there's that level of how do I just really get my message across to somebody? And there are, of course, people who are just talented at explaining things or breaking it down or describing it maybe in a slightly different way. So it's not a bad idea to maybe get some outside perspective. So not the person who sits inside your office every single day.
Right.
They've heard everything from the customer. It can be a good input point, right? They've heard all of the feedback from customers and they've gone through those things, but there's might be some other words that you can use in your copy that might, it just be more interesting and more fun and more enjoyable, right? And this is what AmeriSleep did. They looked at it and they tried to kind of play on that part of saying, like, look, your night's sleep is important to you, and if you lose a night's sleep, that's one that you'll never get back again. And that was something that kind of can resonate with somebody on a very, generally when those customers are searching for a new mattress, I think that they are, there's probably a couple of different types of reasons. And if you look at those and you go, okay, what are they? Are there some that are pain points? There's of course some that are, like pregnant mothers and things like this, that it could have a slightly different message. But having a good copywriter who can translate that, and it doesn't have to be somebody that you outsource to. You could just try it yourself, tweak it every day or every couple of days and see what the feedback and the lift is once you have the metrics in there.
And that is the one thing where e-commerce has a wonderful advantage over other business models, where the testing of copy can happen so rapidly. And based on your website traffic, you can see quickly what's pulling or not pulling. Even WordPress for smaller e-commerce merchants have A/B split modules that you can put in there. We also, there's some, in addition to messaging, there's a business called Jika, I believe it's called Jika, where they do A/B split price testing that's dynamic on the Shopify site. So the ability to test copy, I think, is just, it's one of those opportunities that are always there. It's always persistent to change copy, to figure out what line of copy is going to lift conversion. I think you had an interesting point about, losing that night's sleep, where AmeriSleep probably cashed in on the pain avoiders versus the pleasure seekers, right? Man, I don't want to lose another sleep. I can never get it back. My sleep's gone, right? That's a really nice, compelling message. Great example. So another example is about process, right? So there's a lot of, we had one example about, the urgency message in tactics, another example about copy, but there's also business process that you can improve. And you talked about an example from a B2B company Folder. They make folders, right? Real physical presentation folders, and they lifted quotes by almost 70%, 68% lift in quotes just by rethinking their process. How did that happen?
So, a lot of times, especially in the B2B world, you again are really close to that product, and
right.
You go, I just want to go, and not everybody thinks the exact same way, and helping people, giving them feedback about how they're progressing through that quoting system is definitely an important one. So you've done step one, you're doing it right. It's why you see a lot of the classic checkout carts have, they show the little dot, the 4 dots, and you've got 2 dots done out of the 4, you're getting there. So company folders had a very, let's say, one-page app that they thought was great for just optimizing, right? Where you can just go put in all the information. But what happens with people? They keep scrolling and they keep scrolling and they get lost in where they are. And
right.
They get frustrated, they get annoyed. Especially if it's their first time. They didn't know they were getting into this. They didn't know that it was a big time commitment. And now they've gotten 5 or 10 minutes into something and they have no feedback. They haven't got any of the positive reinforcement back from them. So this is this might be kind of in some respects counterintuitive, where they go like, well, why, you would think just having a simple one page would be great because it's all there. They can go back and review it. But in essence, it actually was better to have it as a step-by-step process and to give them that little bit of a nugget as they went through things.
So it's almost like you're doing these small little micro commitments for the user, where they take one step and they get a pat on the back, say, yeah, you're doing it right, keep going. I take another step, pat on the back, oh yeah, you're doing it right, keep going. And taking that ordering process and just segmenting it into these, like I said, these micro steps.
And you could add that into your analytics too, right? Where you go like, look, they got to, let's say it's 10 steps and they got 5 through it. Maybe there's a problem with step number 5. Maybe you can optimize it, make it clearer. Again, go back to copy, and maybe you can make that a better experience for your customer.
Actually, that's an interesting point, because even like you said, rethinking what you might think would be a seamless one-page experience process, when you break it down, not only does it help the user, but it helps the business learn too, to see what kind of onboarding success they're having from one step to the next. That's great advice. That's a great example. Now, when it comes to ordering product, oftentimes people are saying, gosh, what's the cross-sell, upsell opportunities? And some really breakthrough e-commerce companies like ProFlowers, now 1-800-Flowers, really mastered the art of the cross-sell and the upsell. And you have a really good example from a furniture retailer.
Right. So this furniture retailer, they sell large ticket items. Their sort of average order value is over $1,000. But they carry not just the furniture, right? And the furniture process for a lot of places is that it can be highly customized and it becomes theirs. But they thought about how they still bring a lift, even if you're on say an average order value around $1,000. How do you still lift that and bring it up by just a couple of points? So this is where they already had items that they could, right, like selling insurance and selling things. But one that really was there was the furniture care packages. So you go, you've bought something that's worth $1,000. Why not spend $50 to protect it, to treat it better, to get the stains out when somebody messes up? So how do you and then the question is, when do you give them that right information? Do you give it to them as they're purchasing? That might be a little bit too early. Maybe you can give it to them as they're going through the shopping cart and go, you are just about to give me your credit card for $1,000. How do I make sure that, how are you going to protect it? Have you thought about it? Maybe they do. Maybe they already have the cleaning solutions. But what they did was they brought it in at that stage, and that's where they saw the lift.
That's brilliant. And see, what I love about that is that combines a couple of things. It combines the first example of the urgency. It combines the third example of rethinking a process and where to actually inject that cross-sell, and then actually its own example of the cross-sell. And what I love about this too is that it's a small upsell. As a percentage of the purchase price, it's a small commit upsell. Of course, I just spent $1,000. Of course, I'm going to spend $50 to protect it. But incrementally, that is such a nice little lift. And apparently, you had mentioned in the blog post, they increased average order value 4.6% in 41 days. And that's just incremental dollars that the business didn't have before. And what I love about that example, Paul, is that, again, that's not a new technology. It's not like a new platform that's going to increase. No, they just said, let's just add this. We'll do it with our team. And that's incremental value that the marketing group is adding to that business.
Right, and these types of products, they have probably a different type of a margin on these. They're not so difficult to store. You're already shipping a sofa, so just shipping another bag of something it doesn't change any of those costs. So that's what I thought was really interesting with that.
That's a wonderful example. All right, folks, we have time for one more example. And this was, I thought, a brilliant insight and observation on your part, Paul, where Tulum.com counterintuitively removed its social buttons. And what happened?
So you think you want people to talk about, the purchase, you do, but you also want them to purchase, right? So that's the, almost giving people the information. It's a bit like the previous example, Chris, that give them the right things to do at the right time. You don't have to give them everything. So what they did was they did an A/B test. And they had some variants around, what is it like with the share buttons and what is it without the share buttons. And they saw a significant uptick without having the share buttons because it was coming in at the wrong time.
Right.
You could put this. You could put this into your, your shipping notice, or the follow up in your customer, 14 days after a sale, and go, hey, now you have it. Why don't you share a picture, but directly, in social media when you actually have that physical item in your hands or in your house, and it will be definitely a little bit more authentic as well. It's the right time for it.
That's interesting to say that. And you mentioned in the blog post they lifted sales by, those increase was about almost 12%. And it's kind of funny. It gets back to the adage of what's the job of this page and what's the job of this step, right? The job of that step is to get them to buy. Then the job of the social share is maybe after they received or post-purchase, so they could share it. That's its job then, not to clutter up the buying process. And it's a funny thing because it kind of touches on all this stuff. How do I rethink the process to make sure I make the micro commitments that make the most sense for my customer? How do I do an A/B split test and test this, which I can do just with people? What's the right message? What's the right copy? So all these things play out. And what I love the theme about all of this together is, it seems to me, Paul, that it's a team's investigation into themselves.
I think that's correct, right? How do you make sure somebody's is taking those steps, and that you're not confusing them as well, right? Like, there's a lot of things that is vying for their attention. They've got the cell phone, they've got the alerts on their watch, they've got a cat in the background, and there we go. So how do you don't want to distract somebody, right? They're ready to do something, and if you understand a little bit about that process and simplify it a little bit too, and declutter their lives, right? The little bit of the KonMari method, right? For your website.
Right.
More is not always is better, right? You see some great converting websites that have just the simplest flow there, and I think that's sometimes people go like, oh, we need to have everything in there, but instead of just adding something, taking something away could also have some great benefits.
Wonderful. Great advice. Great advice. All right, Toms, I think that two things. Let's make sure we copy and paste that link to it's already there. So thank you, Thomas. I appreciate that. You've got that e-commerce case studies link. And I think that we are right about time opening up for a couple of questions.
Yeah, and if anyone didn't get that link, it was sent out early in the broadcast for the CoreDNA.com blog. Just drop me a note in the questions tab, and I can send you the link directly. So, a couple questions. I think we got up to 3 if we got time for them. First one, taking all of the 2020 case studies you reviewed into consideration, what are the top 2 best practices you might recommend to a merchant who is operating in the 10 million in annual sales and less category?
The top, I think that the copywriting is an under thought about part of that process. Descriptions, you can talk about imagery, but I think definitely descriptions is both good for just the SEO value that people can get into, understand things. But if you have a look at, everybody knows good copy when they see it. Everybody might not always know what bad copy is, but good copy should really be clear, should be thoughtful. I think it should be generally a little bit of fun, unless you're selling a very serious item. And I think that's what resonates, and break it up. And it should be visually appealing with bullets and things like that. And hopefully your customer can understand quickly what that product is about, the value that it comes across from that. And, they're playing with their credit card and they're ready to purchase.
Makes sense. Next up, for startup merchants, is there a platform that you recommend specifically?
A platform. So obviously CoreDNA is a platform. We generally don't work with startups, or startups don't choose us. I think a Shopify is a great way to get going, or WordPress. WordPress's WooCommerce is a great way to get going. But you can also just get going with a buy button, right? How simple do you want to make your process? That's generally down to how quickly you want to get going, how integrated you want to have it in your systems. If you already have an ordering warehouse system in place, how do you integrate that, and to make sure that you're, can you deal with 10 orders a day? Can you deal with 100 orders a day? Where did those parts break down? And depending on your needs, there's going to be a platform for you on each of those steps, I believe.
Great. And one last one here, going back again to the breadth of the cases that you wrote about, and touching on the environment we're currently in. Which of those cases do you think was the most impressive to you, given the COVID environment we've experienced in 2020?
I think that again, sort of the advantage of all of these parts is that consumer behavior is changing, and it's changing for the better. And I think that the other part of like what I like is how the company folders took their B2B experience and they really thought about their customers. I think that there is a wave coming of B2B experiences that should be improving. So around pricing, around more information, quoting, like this quoting system that they had built. But how do you make that a sort of in the future a more seamless experience? Because you may not have the salespeople calling into your offices anymore because it's just not possible. So how do you enable that self-serving part? I think that a lot can be done. It also streamlines businesses, and your salespeople, they can still do the exact same work, but they're opening up new doors. They're not trying to fill orders in a fax machine or something horrible like that.
Right. You know, it is funny you mentioned that with B2B. You know, B2B typically trails behind the B2C technologies and marketing tactics by 18 months, 2 years, something like that. And I would think that they're going to catch up on e-commerce, and that a platform like yours, especially for the B2B space, would be a place where they can start adopting some of these best practices to simply get more B2B sales.
Right, and I think that's where their customers want to go, right? They don't always want to call up and wait in a call tree. They want to purchase it at midnight. They want to purchase it at 2 p.m. on a Sunday. And again, having that e-commerce store ready, having that experience ready, having the information that's available to those customers, you can give them more information and structured information. And that's the other part of, you know, what goes into that product, right? So in the B2B world, it's not just, say, the product descriptions and images and the price. It might be spec sheets. It might be some support. It might be the person, you know, contact information of the people inside the business who they can talk to about that product. How do they implement a sensor in their large design? So those types of things I think are definitely important. And we do see customers who are really going towards that, where they're going like, how do we transform our business from a B2B standpoint on being ready for that stuff and just making it easier for the customers to buy.
Great examples.
Great,
Paul,
great stuff.
thank you so much for the time. Thomas, do you want to take us out?
Absolutely. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Paul. Wonderful stuff. We appreciate the time and the effort that you put into this. And for those of you who have watched, this video should be up by week's end on our website at the PDMI.com/take-20. Your next opportunity to attend a live online Take 20 episode is Wednesday, November 4th, with the third and final episode of this 3-part series on the e-commerce marketplace. Again, you can check out the upcoming schedule and register to attend any of those at that same website. So thanks again for checking out this episode of Take 20. Enjoy the rest of your day, the rest of your work week. Stay safe and stay well. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much. Take care.
Thank you.